So in this unit, we're going to be working with linear equations, and one thing that's going to come up quite a bit is slope. Okay, so that's what we're going to spend this video talking about, is what is slope, and then we'll talk about how to find it in just a little bit. So slope, when you're looking at a line that's been graphed, is going to tell you how steep or flat the line will be. Okay, so steep would be kind of like how straight up and down, or flat would obviously be a little bit flatter, okay? And so it's either going to be that the line is really, really steep, thinking of like a mountain. If it's really steep, then that means it's going to be a little harder to go up, I guess you could think of. Or if it's flat, it's not as hard to climb up a mountain that's a little bit flatter. And so that's what you can think of slope as, is it's going to be how steep or flat the line is, okay? If you think about it in terms of numbers, because the slope will be a number, the further away from zero the number is, so if it's really, really big or really big in a negative sense, then it's going to be very steep. If it's closer to zero, then it's going to be very flat, okay? So that's just by looking at the slope, how to tell if the line's going to be steep or flat. All right, so how do you find slope? Well, first of all, the letter they use for slope is an M. And to find it, you can find it by looking at a graph, or you can find it by using an equation, okay? So to find it, if you're looking at a graph to find the slope, you're going to think it's rise over run, okay? Because if you think about the steepness, it's going to be how much you're going up versus how much you're traveling left and right. So the rise part is the up and down part. How much do you have to go up to go from one point to the next? And then the run part is how far you have to go sideways to go from one point to the next. And we'll look at it on the graph in a little bit. So that's one way of finding it, is you could do rise over run. The other way is you can use a formula, okay? And so in order to use the formula for slope, you have to find 2 points that are on that line that you're looking at, okay? And so the 2 points, they'll have labeled, and I'll label them over here. You're going to have the coordinates, remember, have an x and a y value, so you're going to have one coordinate. So I'm going to label that as an x1 and a y1. And then you're going to have another coordinate. And so to kind of distinguish between the two, I'm going to label this one with an x2 and a y2. So you're going to have to pick 2 points that are on the line. And then the slope formula, you're going to do the up and down part first, remember, which the axis that goes up and down is your y-axis. And so you're going to take those two y values and you're going to subtract them. So a lot of times in the formulas, you're going to see that they put the second y value first. It really doesn't make a difference as long as you're consistent. I'll talk about that in the next video, okay? But you're going to take your one y value minus the other one. And then on the bottom, whatever y value you put first, you have to go to that point first to start the bottom part. So you take your x values and subtract them. So this would be, since I started with my y2, I'm going to start with my x2, and then you subtract the x1 value, okay? So you subtract your y values on the top, you subtract your x values on the bottom, okay? So that's the formula, all right? And that's what we're going to be doing in the next video when we actually find slope, all right? So slopes and graphs. The slope, when you look at the actual number or the slope of a graph, it's either going to be positive or negative. It could be zero. It could be undefined. And so we're going to look at slopes just by looking at a graph. How do you know if it's positive or negative? Okay, so if you look at a graph and you're looking at a line and it looks something like that when you've graphed it. Well, if you look at the graph from left to right, so always look at graphs, kind of like you read a book, you look at it from left to right. If it goes up, then that means the slope of that line will be a positive number, okay? And then remember, as to how steep the line is, I talked about the bigger the number is, or the further away from zero the number is, the more steep it'll be. So that's a little bit different, okay? But if it goes up from left to right, it's positive. So then the opposite of that is if you look at a graph and you look at it from left to right and it's going down, then that means it's going to have a negative slope. All right, so those are the two that you're going to be able to see right away. Some other graphs that you could have though, and these are special types of graphs, is if your slope is 0, okay? So if you look at a graph and it's just a flat line, it doesn't go up or down or anything like that, it's literally like a flat line, then that means that your slope of that graph is 0, okay? Because it's flat. And remember, a second ago I said the closer it is to 0, the flatter it's going to be. So if it literally is a flat line, then that means the slope will be 0, okay? So then the only other graph that we haven't talked about is if you're looking at it and the line is straight up and down. It's a vertical line. So I'm going to just draw a vertical line here. If it is vertical, then that means that your slope is undefined, okay? So it doesn't actually have a slope. So I kind of like to think of this as if you're skiing and you come to a ski slope that looks like this, you probably don't want to go down it because you'd be smack down on the ground, okay? Because there is no slope. It's essentially a cliff. And so you wouldn't want to do that. So that's the way that I remember that if it's a straight up and down line, it's undefined. Those are the ones that you would just crash into the ground on. So that's just an introduction to slope.